Welcome to the all-new Hoop Nova, your ultimate source for everything basketball.
Nikola Jokic says he wants to be a Nugget for life, but somehow Denver keeps making moves that make it look like they are doing everything possible to push him toward the exit. The Nuggets just lost in the first round, made almost no meaningful improvements, traded away one of their best young players, and now seem to be shifting toward older veterans. If this is how you treat a player like Jokic, you have to wonder what exactly the front office is trying to accomplish. The latest move was sending Payton Watson to Cleveland in a complicated 5-team trade. Denver ultimately received a first-round pick and a second-round pick, while Cleveland landed Watson along with Cam Whitmore. Watson then agreed to a 4-year, $88 million contract with the Cavaliers. From Cleveland's perspective, it makes sense. They got embarrassed by New York in the playoffs and needed to improve. But from Denver's perspective, trading a 24-year-old player who still had room to develop for draft compensation feels like another step backward. And losing Max Strus also hurts because Denver could have used his shooting. Instead, the Nuggets appear to be getting older and more expensive while becoming less competitive around their best player. That is what makes this situation so frustrating. Jokic is not an ordinary superstar. He is one of the greatest players of his generation. And when you have someone like that, you are supposed to spend aggressively to maximize his prime. Instead, Denver seems terrified of the luxury tax. The Watson contract is the perfect example. At 4 years and $88 million, Watson would have cost Denver $22 million per season in salary. But because of the second apron repeater tax, the total financial cost could have reached roughly $177 million for just one season. From the owner's perspective, that is a massive number for a player who probably isn't the difference between winning and losing a championship. You can understand why ownership hesitated. But that is also where the real problem begins. Watson wasn't the reason Denver's roster became so expensive. Those problems were created by earlier decisions. The first major mistake was giving Jamal Murray a maximum extension. Murray had made only one All-NBA team and was coming off a disappointing Olympic performance with Canada. Denver had an opportunity to negotiate from a stronger position, but instead they committed huge money to him without having another team forcing their hand. Then came the Zeke Nagy contract, worth more than $7 million per year, despite the fact that he never developed into the reliable rotation player Denver hoped he would become. After that came Christian Braun's 5-year, $125 million extension. Braun is a useful player, but his offensive regression made that contract look extremely expensive very quickly. Add Aaron Gordon's injury problems to the equation, and suddenly the Nuggets have a bloated roster that costs a fortune without giving Jokic the championship-level depth he needs. And that brings us to the front office. Denver's biggest mistake may have been allowing Tim Connelly to leave. Connelly was the executive who helped construct the 2023 championship team around Jokic. After leaving Denver, he joined Minnesota and built a Timberwolves roster specifically capable of challenging the Nuggets. Since Denver won the championship in 2023, Minnesota has beaten them in 2 of their 3 playoff matchups. Meanwhile, Denver's front office has struggled to replace Connelly's impact. Now everyone is asking the obvious question: could Jokic actually leave? The reason the rumors exploded this summer is because Jokic did not sign the extension that Denver offered him. But there is an important financial explanation. By waiting until next offseason, Jokic can reportedly make significantly more money, potentially around $77 million more over the life of the contract. Jokic himself indicated that the decision was financially motivated. That sounds reassuring, but it doesn't completely eliminate the concern. Jokic is not going to publicly announce that he wants out immediately after a game. He is unlikely to create unnecessary drama while he is still under contract. But the real question isn't whether Jokic likes Denver right now. The question is whether Denver can convince him that this organization is still serious about winning championships. Because if the Nuggets continue cutting costs, trading away young talent, and making questionable roster decisions, eventually Jokic may have to ask himself whether staying loyal is worth sacrificing the final championship years of his career. And if that day ever comes, the Warriors will obviously be one of the teams people talk about. But they would not be the only realistic destination. Any contender with the assets, cap flexibility and willingness to completely reshape its roster would become an immediate threat to land him. The terrifying part for Denver is simple. They may never draft another player like Jokic again. Players like this do not come around every decade. They are generational talents who can dominate an entire era. Jokic has been at or near the top of the NBA for years, winning multiple MVPs and leading Denver to its first championship. You don't get many chances to build around someone like that. Denver already had the hardest part figured out. They found the superstar. They won the championship. The only job left was to keep improving the roster around him. Instead, the Nuggets now look like a team trying to save money while their greatest player is still in his prime. Maybe the front office has a bigger plan. Maybe these moves will eventually lead to another major acquisition. But if nothing changes, Denver could be remembered as the team that had Nikola Jokic and somehow failed to maximize the greatest opportunity in franchise history. And if Jokic eventually decides he has had enough, nobody should be surprised. A lot of this ultimately comes down to one question: how badly does Nikola Jokic actually want to win? Some people argue that Jokic simply doesn't have the same obsession with winning that someone like Kobe Bryant had. And honestly, you can understand why people think that. After Denver won the championship in 2023, one of Jokic's biggest concerns wasn't celebrating for days or planning another championship run. He wanted to know when the parade was over because he wanted to go home and see his horses. That's just who Jokic is. But that doesn't mean he doesn't care about basketball. Anyone who has watched him closely knows he can get extremely emotional and competitive when things matter. We've seen him get into major confrontations, yell at teammates, and completely lose his cool during important games. If he truly didn't care, why would he react like that when the stakes are highest? The biggest difference between Jokic and someone like Giannis Antetokounmpo is that Giannis repeatedly made it clear that loyalty was important, but winning mattered more. Eventually, he was willing to consider leaving when Milwaukee stopped looking like a championship contender. And honestly, if Giannis had been in Jokic's position, he might have already asked out. Denver is starting to resemble the Bucks in some uncomfortable ways. The team is getting worse in the playoffs. The roster is becoming incredibly expensive without getting significantly better, and the front office has sacrificed valuable draft assets. Milwaukee went through the same cycle, making desperate moves and eventually paying huge prices for players like Damian Lillard and other veterans. Now Denver appears to be taking a similar approach, with DeMar DeRozan becoming part of the conversation. So if Jokic eventually decides that Denver isn't giving him enough to compete, where could he actually go? Technically, he could sign and trade with almost any team next offseason, while teams with enough cap space could also pursue him directly. The obvious destination is Golden State. The Warriors could potentially create enough room to offer Jokic a maximum contract. And pairing him with Stephen Curry would be one of the most exciting combinations in the league. But would Golden State actually give him a better championship opportunity than Denver? That's the big question. Joining an aging Warriors roster doesn't automatically guarantee a major upgrade. That's why I think the Lakers could be an even more interesting possibility. If there is one superstar Jokic appears to have a genuine connection with, it's Luka Doncic. Both come from the Balkans and share a similar European basketball background. Whenever they play together, their chemistry is obvious, and from a basketball standpoint, Jokic and Luka could be an incredible pairing. The problem is Los Angeles may have already made things more complicated. The Lakers committed significant money to Austin Reeves, Walker Kessler, and other players this summer, which means creating enough financial flexibility for Jokic would require another major move. One of those contracts could eventually have to be moved. Reeves might make the most sense because the Lakers would need as much defense as possible around Luka and Jokic. Of course, all of this is still hypothetical. Jokic hasn't demanded a trade, and he hasn't publicly hinted that he wants to leave Denver. But the Nuggets offseason has certainly raised questions. If they want Jokic to finish his career in Denver, they need to prove that they are still committed to building a championship roster around him. Because if they keep making moves that look like cost-cutting instead of contention moves, eventually Jokic may have to decide whether loyalty is worth wasting the final years of his prime.